everybody, Brian from Cabinet Joint here. I want to talk about the installation of Conestoga's base pullout, ready to install base pullout. It's a soft close mechanism on the bottom, so you do have that soft close action with a couple of braces to keep it from wobbling back and forth. It's a really nice unit. So we're going to show you how this goes in. Before I do, I want to give you a couple of tidbits on this. Because there's a bracket right here that mounts to the cabinet wall, that bracket only has some throw. That's what keeps this thing from rocking back and forth. It only has a certain distance it can go before you're into a problem. So I guess the point I'm making is when you're doing a pullout, they come for 9, 12, and 15-inch cabinets. You want to actually put them in a 9, 12, or 15-inch wide cabinet. Unlike a trash pullout, which only mounts to the bottom of the cabinet, you can put a double pail unit intended for an 18. You could theoretically put it in a 19 or a 20-inch wide cabinet. Not the case with these. If you're putting in the 12-inch base pullout, don't put it in a 13-inch wide cabinet. It's got to go in a 12. It'll make your installation way, way better. So we're going to go ahead and show you how to install this. We'll talk about installation for inset as well as for overlay as we go through. Make sure you know before you go in what you're installing, inset or overlay, and pay attention to those details. Really what it's got to do with is how far back in to the cabinet itself that we set some of the mounting hardware. So stay tuned, let's get started. All right, everybody, let's get started installing this base pullout in this full door base 12 cabinet. When you open your box, there's not much in this. All you get is the unit. Your shelves are kind of locked in place. They're not where you want them. They're all adjustable, and you can move them by pressing the little plastic tab on the shelf clip, and you can move these up and down. But right now, I'm just going to leave them the way they came, packed from the factory. You also have some hardware. We're going to use that in a minute, so I'll pull that off momentarily. A little bag of screws that both hold the foot, the plate of this down to the floor of the cabinet, as well as a screw to hold the bracket to the cabinet wall, and then you get the 4 screws to hold the door to the front of the unit itself. So all your hardware you're going to need should be right here. Not a bad idea to have some other wood screws handy in case, but they usually ship the right quantity. What I've got in front of me is also the tools you're going to need. Screw gun with a Phillips bit, a pencil, a small Phillips head screwdriver for making micro adjustments, a tape measure. I have 2 wood shims that I'm going to use to create the gap for my inset door. If you're doing overlay, you won't need this. This video does show inset. I am going to show this as an inset. So some of the measurements I talk about, I'll have to also give you the overlay measurement if you're doing overlay. But I have some shims because I'm doing inset, and a block of wood. No matter whether you're doing inset or overlay, you're going to want to cut about a 2.5 by 4-inch block of wood. The reason for that is, and I'll get into this in the installation, is we have to flush out the cabinet wall with the front frame right here. And I can do it on this side just to show you. Right here, because this bracket has to mount to that plate. So we're going to slide this until it contacts that bracket. It doesn't have enough throw to go all the way over and attach to the cabinet wall. So we've got to bring the cabinet wall out. So just a scrap of 3/4 plywood. This is not included with the cabinet from Conestoga, nor with the pullout. You've got to have something else. It can be a piece of 3/4 inch pine from Lowe's. It doesn't have to be plywood. I just happen to have plywood around, and I like plywood because it won't split, that kind of thing. But you will need a block of something to shim that cabinet wall out flush with your front frame opening. All right, let's get started putting this thing in. Okay, so what we do is we flip this upside down. I want to show you what we're doing first to separate the pullout from its track. If I lift this up, you'll see these are your clips that hold the drawer slides together. And what I want to do is just squeeze those red releases, and now my plenum, my base, is separate from the rest of the pullout. And this is what I care to install right now, okay? So let's talk about measurements. My tape measure and my pencil. You should see these in the corner of your screen. I'm going to show you in a moment. If you're doing inset, which is what I'm doing, when you put this track in, slide it in very carefully, make sure you don't hit your front frame. When you put this track in, you want to do a couple of things. First of all, the front of the track, the very, very front, there's a little round half moon shaped cutout. That's the center of the track. That center line has to line up with the center of the opening. So you're going to want to measure your opening, which I already did. Opening is 9 inches, so in my case it's going to be 4.5 to the center of the opening, and I make a little pencil line. That's the center of my cabinet, and I want to line up that half moon shape with the center line I just made. And that makes sure my unit is centered in my opening. Second thing I want to do for inset is to make sure that the front of this bracket is 3/4 of an inch step back from the front of the back of the front frame. All right, so it's 3/4 of an inch gap from there to there. If you're doing overlay, you're going to want to pull this right up tight. Much easier with overlay. Just find your center line and pull it up tight. With inset, I've got to step it back. And the reason is my door is going to occupy 3/4 of an inch inside the frame, so everything gets shoved back into the cabinet by 3/4 of an inch. So once I have my center line and I have my 3/4 inch setback, I can strike a line and make sure it's all lined up. And now is when I'm going to take this pack of hardware, and I'm going to pull out the screws that I use to hold plant them to the floor of the cabinet. Those are the ones I want. Typically they're black. I'm not sure if they are in this case, but okay. Get all my hardware here. So I have a whole bunch of screws here, and these 4 are the ones that are used to hold the door to the face of this as its last step, kind of. So I'm going to set them off to the side. These pan head screws, I'm going to need 4 of them. And what we have here is there's a bunch of keyhole slots in this platform, front and back. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can put a screw in all 8 of those slots, and the slots allow you to micro adjust. If you find out your pullout is coming out kind of tilted and you want to straighten it, you can just loosen the screws up, straighten things out, and lock it back down. So obviously we want to put it in roughly the center of each of those spots. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with my screw gun, and we'll show you a close-up of those slots so you understand what's going on, but we're going to put a screw in each of the center of those slots, fore and aft. Be right back. Okay, so I've got my screws holding my plenum to the cabinet floor, and one thing I wanted to make mention of is you want to make sure the track is running parallel, because this track can kind of shift because this plate and the plate and back are not integrated. So suffice it to say, take a tape measure, put it against the cabinet wall, and measure it from the cabinet wall to the upper part of the vertical part of your door glide, front and back. And it should be about 1 inch if you're going in a 12-inch cabinet, such as I am here. Should be about 1 inch the same front and back. If you've got 7/8 in the back and 1 inch in the front, that means it's not running parallel. So get it running straight before you drive your screws home. Once this plate's down and my glides are operable and ready to go, all I have to do is drop my pullout into the cabinet. Just set it on top and give it a push. And now the pullout itself is in, okay? But what you're going to see is it's wobbling all over the place. We don't want that. So the manufacturer has provided 2 ways to anchor this in place. One is with the side bracket right here. We'll show a close-up of that. This side bracket, which has a little set screw, you can loosen it up to move it in and out. That's what's going to mount to our piece of wood. And there's also a rear bracket all the way at the back of the cabinet that mounts to the cabinet rear. So because I've got this in and I can now get it lined up, I can dial those locations in perfectly with the unit installed. I believe the instructions want you to kind of locate those things before you even install this, and to me that just doesn't seem logical. So we put the track in the bottom, slide the unit in, and then make our final adjustments. So that's what I'm going to do now, is grab my block of wood. We'll see if we can make this understandable for you. Got my block of wood, and it's going to go right up inside the cabinet like that. And I'm going to use a couple of screws to hold that in place. I'll do that off camera, but we'll get a close-up of this when we're done. I'm going to put a couple of screws in to hold it to the cabinet wall, and then use the screws that came with this unit to hold the bracket to that block. And once I do that, this won't rock around, and then I can anchor the rear one, because now I know I'm vertically straight. Got it all dialed in, I'm vertically straight. I just got to take that bottom runner and run it to the back of the cabinet. Wherever that rear bracket mounts is where I'm going to attach it. So we'll show you all that in a moment, but first let me install my little spacer block behind that front frame. We'll be right back. Okay, so I went and affixed with a couple of wood screws my wood block, and then I went ahead and just kind of finished up, and it's probably easier just to talk about it and show you some videos of what I did versus talking about it and you're trying to imagine it. So I have this bracket under here that slides in and out. That's what mounts to the block I put in. What I want to do is slide the glide, the top glide, all the way back until the rear bracket hits the cabinet back. nice and tight. And once it does that, that's where I'm going to set this angle bracket into that block of wood. So I used one of the screws provided by the manufacturer to hold that block, and that keeps the stability left to right so it won't shift this way. And now, because I shoved it all the way to the back, now my rear bracket's right where it needs to be. So I just put the 3 required screws that came with the package. I put those in the back bracket, and now the back bracket is secured. So remember, there's 2 bottom glides, and there's this 1 ball bearing glide that runs across the bottom of this top section. You want to make sure that's running in parallel and the unit's not tipped before you put any of those in. So when I put this bracket in, I made sure my unit had the same distance on either side, and it was nice and plumb and vertical inside the opening. It wasn't racked. There's a little set screw in the bottom of that bracket that allows you to push and pull. So if I release that set screw, then I can show you this, but if I release that set screw, now I can move the unit again to get that dialed in. So I'm not exactly where I want it to be. I can go ahead and release that set screw, get it dialed in, and retorque it, and we're done. So now what we're going to move to is installing the door on the unit itself. So there's a couple little things. Let me get my set screw back on and make sure I'm still vertical. And I'll come back on and show you how to put the door on, but you're going to need the 4 little pads that came with the unit. These are sticky on both sides, and we're going to affix them here to hold the door on. Once we set it in place, that will allow the door to stay locked in place till I screw it on. So let me get this dialed back in, and we'll come back on and put the door on with you. Okay, we have prepped our pull-out for door. So what we did here is, you'll see on the close-up, I have these tabs that move in and out using set screws that are on the inside. Release the 2 set screws on each bracket and slide this out. In the case of inset, you got to make sure you're just clear in that front frame. With overlay, the door is hanging way out here, so you can move these way out to catch the frame of the door. Inset's a little tougher. You got to be very careful to make sure this just misses the front frame, but you're still getting enough of that keyhole slot showing to get a screw in. So I've done that on all 4 of these, locked them back in place so these are no longer moving. And then I have these 4 pads sticky on both sides, these 3M very sticky pads, and I put them on all 4 of those brackets, and I went on the inside of this protruding plate because what I want to try to minimize is a big gap between the face of the actual wooden pullout and the back of the door. And the more, if I put this on this one out here, I'm just adding, all I'm doing is adding another 1/16 of an inch of distance. So I put it on the inside, I still got just enough sticky showing. The door should hold on when I set it in place to allow me to pull it off, hold it with my hand, and run my screws in. So I did all 4 of those sticky tabs. Now, with overlay, it's much easier because you just stick the door on, get it lined up flush with the bottom of the cabinet, 1/4 of an inch on both sides, get it vertical, stick it on. Again, your face of yours for overlay is going to be out flush with the face of the cabinet. In my case, it's inset, so it's back in. Inset's a little tougher. This is where these shims come in. I have to kind of hold the door up off the floor of the front frame so I get my consistent gapping, okay? So I've got to have to figure out what that dimension is. I'm going to cut these wafers down. I know that I have supposed to have a 3/32 inch gap all the way around. So I'm going to take these shims and cut them down so I have the thickness I want. I'm going to set those tabs right inside there and then go ahead and set my door in place. So let me do that. I've already marked mine. Going to cut the shims. And I can create 2 out of 1. So I just set them in place. Take my door, and one comment I want to make on the door with inset, remember that when Conestoga makes these, every door is matched to its frame because they're actually making sure that that gap is the same all the way around and handling the door squaring up if necessary. So they mark the door on the bottom edge for a base door. So in this case, that number is stamped right there. I don't want to put the door in this way, or every time I pull that pullout out, I'm going to be looking at a stamped number at the top. We want to make sure that number is down, okay? So I set the door in place. I get my gapping right, left to right. And I push until it's locked on. Now again, you can dial in spacing with that bracket I showed you inside. We can always tilt it a little bit to get the bracket or the gap to be a little bit different. But I just push this on until those sticky pads are locked in place. You can see my gap didn't change. I still have my gap down below. And now holding the door on with my hand, I open this up. And the first thing I would do is grab a clamp. So I'm gonna do that right now. Actually, I'm gonna shut that first. Grab a clamp. Little hand clamp like this. When you open this door up, immediately grab it from the side and just get a clamp that holds that door on for you. What we don't want to have happen is the door falls off while you're working on it. Another point of note is this pull-out gets very heavy. If I let this go, you can see the whole cabinet tips. Don't let your cabinet fall off your work surface. So now all I got to do is get a pre-drill and run a pre-drill in all 4 of these holes for this door. Run a pre-drill and then run the 4 screws that came with the unit into those holes. Take my clamp off and I'm done. So I'm going to do that off camera, come back on and show you the final result. Okay, so we're all wrapped up. Actually, I didn't have to do any door adjustments. When I put those 4 screws in the back of this and had those spaces at the bottom, it happened to line up perfect. Again, if I had any kind of tilt going on with a gap here and here didn't match, you could use that set screw to kind of tilt the door that way. You've also got the tabs, these 4 tabs, those are slotted vertically. So if your door was hanging a little low or a little too high up here, you can always loosen all 4 of those and drop the door down and raise it up. And in my case, I lucked out, didn't have to do any adjustments. So we have a fully installed functioning pull-out. I believe there's some other variations on this unit where you can get one that's not for a full door. There's a drawer up here and the unit is down below. So they all kind of have variations on a theme in terms of how they install. But they do make the organization of your canned goods and so forth way, way more accessible. Obviously, these are locked in place. They are adjustable in, I believe, 1-inch increments. So you can move these any way you want. You can take a shelf out. May even be able to buy an extra shelf if you wanted one through Rev-A-Shelf, but I'm not sure if we sell those. But you get a bottom, 2 middles, and a top. This top one's fixed, the bottom one's fixed. These 2 middle ones move up and down at your leisure. You have these nice chrome rails to keep your goods, in place. So just all in all, a very, very nice unit. If you have any questions, your sales rep or cabinet coach, as we call them, can always help you. Just give them a call at 888-211-6482 or reach out to us by email. And as always, thanks so much for watching.